Welcome to the latest episode of the Real World Nutrition Podcast. This is episode 216, NOVA classification and ultra-processed foods. What processed really means. Hi everyone, welcome back to the Real World Nutrition Podcast. As I said in the opening and the title, today I'm talking about a topic that tends to get everyone worked up. People are very adamant about this, and there's not always straightforward information, and that is ultra-processed foods. Or more specifically, what I'm going to share with you here is the NOVA classification system that attempts to sort foods into categories based on how they are processed. So I covered this in a recent blog post, as I often do. And today I'm expanding on those ideas to get into the parts that didn't fit into that written article. And the point here today is to explain the system and show that this term processed foods may not always mean what people think it does. And I want you to keep this in mind. Again, as with many things in nutrition, this is not an all or nothing, black and white, right or wrong way of thinking about food, because that isn't helpful. We need to eat, and sometimes eating something, even if it's processed or ultra-processed, is better than nothing. So to suggest that we will never eat processed foods, or people saying, I don't like processed foods or I won't eat processed foods, we need to acknowledge that this is coming from a place of privilege, meaning we may have the resources to make those choices to not eat these ultra-processed foods, but not everyone does. So I just want to have that in the back of your mind as I'm going through this. So I want us to first address what processed really means. Then I'm going to address where the NOVA system came from, what it gets right, what it gets not quite right, and how to make sense of all of this. So first up, what does processed even mean? So before I get into the NOVA classification, I want to get clear on this word processed. People use it to mean everything from slicing apples to manufacturing snap cakes, for example. And here's the thing, processing is any step that changes a food from its original state. So any step that changes food. So that includes washing, chopping, cooking, grinding, freezing, fermenting, drying, canning, mixing ingredients, or even just packaging. So if you take that definition literally, think about it. Pretty much everything people eat is processed. So even a bag of baby carrots or sliced apples are processed. Frozen vegetables are processed. Milk is processed, thank goodness, because it is pasteurized. Your bread, even the most basic kind or homemade bread, is processed. So when people say processed as if it's automatically negative, they're skipping a lot of the steps. And people say, well, you know what I mean, but I don't know what people mean because there's different definitions for different people. So let me talk about this NOVA system. And you may have heard of it. You probably haven't. A lot of people haven't. So where did NOVA come from? So this NOVA system was developed by researchers in Brazil as a way to categorize food based on the type and degree of processing used. So it's strictly for processing level. It's not a nutrient-based system. It does not judge foods by calories, fat, sugar, or other vitamins or other nutrients like vitamins and minerals. It is strictly about how much processing occurs. And this idea of the NOVA system was to help with public health research. It was not originally designed for consumer education, but it has leaked into that space. So now people see the term ultra-processed everywhere and assume it's a warning label. Now this happens a lot in the field of nutrition where there is some concept that is meant for research and it becomes part of the general public adopting things outside of what it was meant to be. So with this, the NOVA has strengths and limitations. It helps identify broad categories, but it's not perfect and it should not be treated as the final word on food quality. So there are 4 NOVA groups. And before I go on, sometimes people may ask or may wonder, and I've looked it up, what NOVA means or what it stands for. It is not an acronym for anything. I didn't dive deep enough to find where that NOVA word came from, other than I know NOVA means no go in Spanish, but Brazil speaks Portuguese. But just wanted to put that out there because that's one of those things that's always bugged me. I still don't know the answer. All right, so the 4 NOVA food groups. So the 4 categories. Group 1, unprocessed or minimally processed foods. So this is fruits, vegetables, plain grains, legumes, nuts, fresh meat, eggs, and milk. And it also includes frozen fruits and vegetables, washed and packaged greens, roasted nuts without any ingredients, and foods that have been dried, ground, or refrigerated. So these foods may be slightly altered, but remain close to their original form. So again, minimally processed, but keep in mind the definition of processed. Some of these are more processed than people think, with washed and packaged, frozen, roasted, fresh meat. I always say, thank goodness my meat is processed for me. So even those categories, there's still some processing there. All right, group 2 are processed culinary ingredients. So these are ingredients extracted from group 1. And examples here includes oils, butter, sugar, salt, flour, and other starches. And you would not eat most of these alone, but you use them to prepare meals. So you're not eating oil by itself or flour by itself. They are ingredients in things we use to make meals or other foods. Now, group 3 is where we get to the processed foods that people tend to think of. So group 3 is processed foods. So these are foods made by combining group 1 and group 2 items. So examples would include canned vegetables with salt, canned beans, canned fish, cheese, simple breads, and yogurt with added salt or sugar. So these foods usually have 2 or 3 ingredients. So even though people say fewer ingredients, the better, that's still in the classification of processed foods. And again, these aren't grading anything on nutrient value. It's just the level of processing. And then there's group 4, the ultra-processed foods. And this is the category that tends to get all the attention. Group 4 foods are formulated products that often contain ingredients that are not usually found in home kitchens. So things like protein isolates, emulsifiers, stabilizers, colorings, and flavorings. You may have colorings and flavorings in your home kitchen, But that's for a very specific purpose, but considering what you might use those for, it's probably an ultra-processed food. But examples in this category would be soft drinks, packaged pastries, many snack foods, fast food items, frozen dinners, instant noodles, flavored chips, and many convenience foods. So again, this does not mean the food is dangerous or toxic. It means it includes complex formulations that change taste, texture, shelf life, or convenience. So why do ultra-processed foods get so much attention? Now, this may seem obvious, but I do want to highlight it. There's a few reasons. First up, many of the foods in this category tend to be lower in fiber and higher in added sugar, sodium, or certain types of fats. Not all of them, but many of them. Another is that people tend to eat more of them because they're convenient and designed to be more appealing, often because of taste, but for other reasons. But here's the problem with this. People oversimplify. They hear ultra-processed and assume it's harmful. They hear unprocessed and assume that means healthy. And neither one is always true. So a cheese stick is processed and provides nutrients. A homemade brownie isn't really ultra-processed, but it's certainly not a nutrient-dense food either. So a homemade brownie, not ultra-processed because it's not been formulated to have a long shelf life or be super convenient. Of course, many of us will make something and think, yeah, sure, this is processed. But in all those definitions, it probably doesn't fall into that category, but it doesn't mean it's healthier. A fortified breakfast cereal might offer more vitamins and minerals, so something that would be technically ultra-processed, but it might offer more nutrients than, say, a homemade muffin. So here, as with so many things with nutrition, the context matters. So what about the limitations with the NOVA classification system? So again, this is where some things will get interesting, and keep in mind it's useful for broad research, but it does have its limitations. So first up, it does not evaluate nutritional value. A fortified whole grain cereal might be categorized as ultra-processed, even though it is nutrient dense. A fortified whole grain cereal, I'm not talking about the sugar sweetened cereals that kids tend to like, I'm talking about a whole grain cereal. Technically would be ultra-processed. That doesn't mean it's not good for us or it doesn't have benefits. The NOVA classification also groups foods based on ingredients that consumers don't always need to avoid. Stabilizers and emulsifiers are not all created equal. And there are some things where I'm glad they don't separate. So emulsifiers helps oil and water stay mixed together. So think of mayonnaise. That stuff is made of vinegar and oil, and it would separate without an emulsifier. It's not a bad thing to have an emulsifier. Another limitation of NOVA that I hear a lot is that it creates confusion, or it can create confusion if people don't know the nuances here. People hear ultra-processed and think they should feel guilty for eating those foods. And then this one is the most important in my opinion. It does not account for access, cost, or convenience. Many people depend on shelf-stable foods because they live in a food desert, have limited time, or limited resources. So that's when I said at the beginning, coming from this with an attitude of eliminating processed foods or ultra-processed foods is in part coming from a place of privilege. if we don't have access to these foods, then we want to have access to fresh foods. I would definitely be going for food that is shelf stable, not going to spoil, and if I don't have to cook it or don't have to refrigerate it, even better. So if someone works long hours, raises kids, or has limited kitchen tools, telling them to avoid all of those group 4 foods is unrealistic and not supportive. Yes, we'd like to lean towards less of those ultra-processed foods, but shaming people for having them does not help anyone and actually makes you look bad. So what does this mean for real life eating? So eating in the real world. Here's the part that matters. Instead of thinking about these categories, think about your day. Think about your week. Think about your overall pattern of eating. And ask yourself these simple questions. Does this meal have protein, fiber, and something colorful? Does this food help me meet my nutrition needs? Does it keep me full for a reasonable amount of time? Does it fit my schedule and my budget? Do I enjoy it? And if the answer is yes, then the category it goes in when it's talking about the NOVA classification, it doesn't matter. It matters a lot less, I should say. So it's not about eliminating all ultra-processed foods. It's about building a foundation of balanced meals and using convenience foods when they make sense. Canned beans, bag salad, jarred pasta, rotisserie chicken, frozen vegetables, and whole grain bread, these could be lifesavers, and all of those things I just listed involve processing. And that is fine. Those are all things I use in my home. So I want to wrap this up with some practical examples. Here are some ways people can use processed foods without sacrificing nutrition. A frozen vegetable blend with chicken and rice can make a balanced meal in minutes. And I'm thinking more of like the rotisserie chicken, already made, already cooked, I should say. A cup of yogurt, even if it's flavored, with some nuts, some fruit. It's easy, it provides protein, it provides probiotics, it provides plenty of vitamins and minerals and fiber when you have those nuts and fruit. A pre-made soup paired with a sandwich can be a good lunch. It's a classic lunch, especially when you don't have time to cook. Actually, a pre-made soup and a sandwich was my dinner last night. These options are not inferior. They're realistic. So keeping cans of food, soup, beans, tomatoes in your pantry are fine. So with the big picture, the point again is not to label foods as good or bad. It is to understand where they fall and how they fit into your routine. Food processing often exists for safety, shelf life, cost control, and convenience. When I say convenience, that means we don't have to go to the market or the grocery store several times a week because the food's gone bad or will go bad. As many processed foods help with preventing or minimizing food waste and make it possible for people to nourish themselves even with limited time or limited resources. If someone wants to reduce their intake of ultra-processed foods, of course that is fine. But it should be done with clarity and intention, not out of fear or judgment. Look at the whole diet, not just one category or meal within the diet. So with that, if you want to read the blog that goes with this episode, of course, that lists all the 4 categories of the NOVA classification system, I have it linked in the show notes. And again, it goes through the categories with examples and explains why it's misunderstood. All right, that's it for this week's episode of Real World Nutrition. As always, thanks for listening. And if this topic comes up over the holidays or the next several weeks with friends and family, maybe share what you learned here, where you learned it. Real World Nutrition, the Real World Nutrition podcast is available on all major podcast platforms, as well as on my website, ShellyRael.com, where over there's loads of additional content, resources, and information. And with that, you all take care and bye for now.